This time of year is when businesses file their annual reports. We all have business reports all through the day, excellently covered by Ross Greenwood. And normally it's all about, profit and loss, turnover and blah, blah. Only this year there was something else, something extra, something extraordinary, because retailer after retailer has said, oh, by the way, there is something really sick in Victoria. It's the crime. Now today, Wesfarmers, which runs Bunnings, Kmart, Officeworks, Target, says sales in Victoria are bad compared to everywhere else. And it says the only area where we're seeing stronger growth in Victoria is the sale of home security products within Bunnings. And it says that's quite a sad statistic, and it is. But what makes it even sadder is the video that Wesfarmers has released of attacks on Bunnings staff, not all in Victoria, I should add, video that shows more violence from customers than I could ever have imagined. But Wesfarmers isn't alone in warning that something is sick in the state of Victoria in particular. Woolworths reported that violent incidents at its stores around Australia jumped by over a quarter in the past year, but Victorian stores accounted for half that spike. A whole half. Same at Coles. Its Victorian stores suffer 40% more crime than its New South Wales one. Same again at Endeavour, that has Dan Murphy's and BWS. It reported that crime and violence from organised criminals is worse than Victoria. And on it goes. IGA says its Victorian stores get hit about once a week by thieves, often armed with machetes, but its stores in other states have no such problem. And Victorian police say that retail theft is up almost 40% in a year. 40%. Joining me is Sky News presenter James McPherson of the Late Debate here at Sky at 10 p.m. and Kristy McSweeney, who has worked for Coalition Prime Ministers and Premiers. Kristy, this state of Victoria seems to be in a moral rot. Why is it so much worse in Victoria than the rest of Australia?
Well, part of it is I feel that the government has taken its eye off the ball in keeping on top of legislation that needs to be enacted. They have made a significant deal out of recent amendments to their bail laws, but they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do that, and they're still not strong enough. Another reason is, and I learnt this, Andrew, from going to a local crime community safety forum in my local electorate of Paran, represented by our fantastic Liberal MP, Rachel Westaway, first-term MP, who has done all the work and put together all the data of crime in our local area and across Victoria, which demonstrates that the police force in Victoria is about 2,000 police short of the benchmark numbers, and that's a combination of people on workers' compensation, people retiring at the latest EBA and not replacing them. And of course, people aren't wanting to go into the police force because the Victorian government put the police to work during COVID, putting them in a position where they had to arrest people out for a walk if they were 5.5 kilometres over or over a 5K limit, or arresting people for having a friend round to watch the footy. And so the reputation of the police has been probably not been put in a positive light by the Victorian government. So they're having problems recruiting, they are short, they're not funding the police force. There's one 24-hour police station in a significant area of the suburbs in which I live in Melbourne, and if you go to several police stations around Melbourne, they say, we're closed, go to the next one, you go to the next one, we close at a certain hour, go to the next one. It's really, really difficult, and the data of the Coalition shows 43% of crime, which is not against a person, so that's retail crime, burglary, car theft, 43% of those crimes are unsolved when the quarterly data comes out. That's endemic, and no wonder people are buying security equipment. We did it in my block of apartments.
I'm not surprised too. James, when you see the sort of figures I had and, that Kristy just went through, and the rest of the Victoria, the potholes, the this, the that, it seems to me we're not just talking about a crime problem in this state that is dragging down the rest of the country. We're talking about a moral rot.
Yeah, we absolutely are, and you can sum it up in one word: Labor. They don't believe in objective truths, and you see it everywhere. On the issue of crime, I mean, they don't believe in policing crime, and so now Victoria has a lot of it. I could run through the examples. I'll just give you three. Jail as a last resort has been a Labor policy. Well, that only leads to more crime. But think about policies like putting a heroin injecting room next to a primary school, or refusing to police public drunkenness. So the Victorian government just don't believe in policing crime. It's not that they're incompetent, it's an ideology that they hold to, and they pretend to care when people make enough noise. There's machete attacks, so what do? They put amnesty bins outside police stations expecting criminals are going to turn in their weapons, or they promise retailers will get tough on people who harass your staff. They've been promising those laws since May last year, still haven't legislated them. So even when they talk tough, they don't really mean it. But this is a government that says you're disgusting if you dare to ask why 5-year-olds are taught that they may have been born in the wrong body. This is a government that under Daniel Andrews said you were disgusting if you believed in a right to life and you were pro-life rather than anti-abortion. So you're quite right to point out, Andrew, the crime issue is one part of it, but there's a moral degradation right through Victoria that is promoted by Labor, where they don't believe in objective truths. It's subjective reality everywhere. And are we really surprised that we end up with a state where lawlessness is rife?
I know. Look, it just feels so strange. I mean, I live in Victoria. It feels really odd what's going on here, and it's not healthy. You can't have a society fraying like this. I mean, the violence that I was showed in that video, for instance, Kristy, I mean, the machete attacks and all that, a man at a service station nearly having his hand chopped off in a machete. This is really different, isn't it? It is different from before. It's different from other states.
Yeah, it's certainly a different type of crime that's been allowed to flourish here in Victoria. I don't know what the social demography about Victoria in particular is that makes it different to across the border in New South Wales, but I do know it's largely because the government has taken their eye off the ball. And even just going back to my local area, Melbourne viewers will know Chapel Street, where I live, which is the scene of fire bombings around the illegal tobacco and organised crime control of illegal tobacco. And it is out of control, but the Victorian government's response to that was to set up an illegal tobacco task force, which was too little too late, which has 14 tobacco inspectors to go around the whole state and find people who are selling these illegal materials, whereas New South Wales, who doesn't have half the problem that we do here in Victoria, implemented a task force of 48 tobacco inspectors. So you can see that the government isn't taking it seriously. They don't have the money, Andrew, to fund policing, and they don't have the money to fund these task force. They don't have the money to provide simple things like safety lighting in areas of high traffic. Councils are now shouldering the burden of neighbourhood safety and crime prevention initiatives, and it shouldn't be their job. But the Victorian government's broke. You know, there's a lot of budget has gone into projects to nowhere.
Andrew, I've got to point out though, they don't have money to fund police, but they've got money to fund a treaty with Indigenous people. They've got money for all those sorts of projects. And when it comes to law and order, there are certain laws they love to police. Don't you dare touch your mobile phone while you're driving your car. The police in Victoria will be on to you in a flash. Don't do 45 in a 40 zone. They will be on to you. Don't dare be a priest who tries to talk a person with gender dysphoria out of having a sex change. The Victorian government are really keen to police those sorts of crimes. That's why I say it's not incompetence, and I don't even believe it's a budget issue. It's an ideological bent that is unique to the Victorian Labor Party.
Oh,
it's a preference
definitely
of
in the culture. I mean,
yes.
we had. This is also the place where, well, you know, that we threw out the the Iranian ambassador, or the government's thrown out the Iranian ambassador because Iran has been accused of connecting with a criminal guy that's I think sitting in Iraq at the moment, to go and torch Jewish targets in Sydney and Melbourne. That guy that is suspected of being the mastermind of this plan actually is responsible in large part for a gang war for illegal tobacco outlets in Australia, and most of the more than 200 shops torched are in Victoria. Again, I mean, there's something really odd going on in this state. But James, I'll stick with you. You mentioned a couple of times transgender issues. There was a shocking shooting at a church in America yesterday that raises something almost no journalist is there to mention. A man, a transgender woman now, killed 2 children, injured many more children and worshippers at this church after filming himself with ammunition and weapons with slogans such as "Israel must fall" and "6 million wasn't enough," and "kill Donald Trump" and things like that. And the thing is, there have been an unusual number of shootings in America by transgender killers, like one in Maryland, 4 dead, one in Nashville. This killer was actually born a woman who slaughtered 6 people, 3 of them children, and another one as well. Now, I should say there is also a culture of violence being preached at the same time by a minority of transgender activists and the hard left, death before detransition. They're going to fear us no matter what, so let the fear come from a place of reality. This is all on the internet. And Trans Day of Vengeance. Mate, what is going on?
Yeah, it's obviously a great tragedy that's occurred, Andrew. What I found interesting was that the reflex reaction of the mayor, Jacob Frey, was to warn people not to direct hate towards the trans community. And no one was directing hate, but people were asking the kind of questions that naturally arise from the information you've just shared. Why does there tend to be an increase in the proportion of transgendered people committing these kinds of crimes, particularly in the United States? But his reflex reaction was to say, you're not allowed to talk about those sorts of things. We don't want that conversation to occur. Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to ask, if you've got people who have mental health challenges and then they're being pumped full of drugs, they're being isolated, they're being fed a whole lot of ideological narratives such as you've just displayed, it's fair to ask, is this the best way to care for people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, bearing in mind their overrepresentation now in school shootings as a proportion of the population? The thing that concerns me, as I said, is the reflex reaction of politicians in the US was to say you're not allowed to have that conversation. And one more thing, you mentioned the shooter had messages about hating Donald Trump, about hating Israel. No one's really talked about the fact that in the bedroom of the shooter there was a target with the face of Jesus at the top of the target, and on one of the guns was written, "Where's your God now?" And the killer drew a very detailed diagram of the church, and then he filmed himself ramming a knife into the middle of the church auditorium diagram that he had drawn. This was a crime against Christian Catholics. And there was no one talking about the need to protect the Christian community. That was lost in the rush to say, let's not make any assumptions or have any honest conversations about what we're doing with people with gender dysphoria. That is a major worry.
And I do want to underline that we're talking in a minority. I mean, there are a lot of...
Of course.
The vast majority of transgender people, like the vast majority of any sexuality, would be vehemently against what happened. But the point is, I think, again, which you touched on, there are people identifying as transgender, and there might be a very small minority, but there are, that suffer, as the Cass inquiry in Britain suggested, other mental issues that they've got to be dealt with, and changing their supposed gender with surgery is not the solution. And I think we might have seen, like with this disturbed person, one more example of where the gender wasn't really the problem here. But Kristy, this goes to this rhetoric of violence too, that's being promoted among various groups on the internet. Now the sovereign citizens, for example, one of them now behind the murder in Victoria of 2 police officers. You know, people almost egging themselves on online as if somehow that's not reality, and yet it seems to seed an awful kind of hatred.
Oh, absolutely. Look, we have seen, we've all now learnt what a sovereign citizen is. It wasn't a term that I was super familiar with prior to the tragedy that occurred here in Victoria yesterday. And can I also commend, after constantly attacking them for all their various failures, the Victorian government for lighting up landmark buildings in the city of Melbourne blue in recognition of the tragedy that occurred, particularly recognising the work our police force does and putting themselves in the line of fire, quite literally, which was an awful event for the police force at large and their families. But I have done some research into this, and it appears that it's quite prevalent in Victoria. A lot of political scientists seem to think, and a lot of these behavioural theorists who study these things think that people on the more chaotic sort of lone wolf end of the sovereign citizenship movement live in regional Victoria as well as regional Tasmania, and that the movement has been fueled by disenfranchising these people through the pandemic. They began to feel that the law shouldn't apply, it wasn't just, they want to disobey police, and so they have taken that overreach of pandemic regulation that we had here in Victoria and crafted conspiracy theories and a movement against it, and it's bundled up with all sorts of other far-right conspiracy fringe theories. But there is no doubt that there are people on the internet fueling this, and we just saw you put up the tweets and social media examples of those kids, and there shouldn't be a place on the internet for kids to be co-opted into those sorts of cults, I'm going to say, that breathe this hatred on the internet.
Look, once again, you mentioned Victoria as an epicentre of this sort of stuff, and it just goes to one of the theories. It's about more than crime and all that. It's just a culture, and I think what we're seeing in Victoria, which has had such extreme politics, extreme lockdown, extreme this, extreme that, extreme, you know, extremes breed extremes. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. It's not just true in physics. I think it's also true in the way you manage people. Kristy McSweeney, James McPherson, thank you very much to you both.